What up, you guys? Here on Open View again, ready to exchange our perspective, to expand our view. Today we have Todd from Undercurrent in Charlotte. Now, I'm a big fan of Undercurrent. If you watch my stories, their horchata is to die for right now for their summer menu. But I wanted to know, Todd, what was your first sip of coffee?
My first sip of coffee was in 1993.
What? Okay.
I was, I think, 16, 17 years old.
Okay.
And I was at my friend Jill Gibson's home. And she had been drinking coffee for some period of time. And it was just a cup of drip coffee made in just an old school coffee maker.
Okay.
It may have been instant, but not instant, but it may have been something like Folgers.
Right.
Or something like that. And it had cream and sugar in it. And I tasted it, and I just loved the way it tasted. And, you know, I just drank maybe probably a third of a cup of coffee that first time. Sort of noticed the effects of the caffeine. And then as I hung out with Jill more often, we would occasionally have coffee at her home. And that started sort of me drinking coffee. I was in 11th grade at the time.
Nice.
And then we started going to this place called Merlin's Vision. It wasn't a coffee shop. It was in downtown DeLand, Florida, where I lived. And they had this machine that made these frozen coffee drinks. Okay. So that's what I started drinking. And we would go kind of, you know, like during school or like during our lunch period or after school on weekends. And then from that point on, I just started getting exposed to coffee and drinking coffee more often. Interestingly, Jill is a person that I worked with in 12th grade on what we consider to be an underground magazine made up of a collection of poems, art, stories, advocacy articles, things like that. That was called Undercurrent.
Really?
DeLand's Undercurrent. And the first article on the first page was written by me and it was titled Coffee.
Nice.
Well, it wasn't about coffee, but when we were thinking about the name for Undercurrent, before it had a name, this was 7 years ago, my wife said, "Todd, what was the name of that magazine you wrote in high school?" And my mind went blank and I couldn't remember at first.
Right.
We literally I went and found it and it was like, of course, Undercurrent. I mean, it's the only thing like that I've ever made in my life. Opened it up, first page was coffee, like Undercurrent coffee. Thought about what that meant, what it meant to me, and just realized that's a really cool name.
Yeah.
And that's actually where the name Undercurrent came from. And that was a magazine that myself, Jill Gibson, and our friend Lori created together. And Jill was really the impetus behind Undercurrent magazine and the first person who introduced me to coffee.
That's wild.
So it's kind of neat that all these years later that's sort of
full circle.
Yeah, full circle on how Undercurrent
came about.
Anyway, yeah.
That's crazy. So like, for me, my first sip of coffee, I still can't recall it. I just know that like it's always been around me. My parents drank it. My grandparents drank it. My mom drinks it still with like, I would say cream and sugar with a splash of coffee. She's all about the sugar. And then as I was in college, obviously I needed it more throughout college to stay awake. And then I got more into specialty coffee, just going around different coffee shops. And I stumbled upon Undercurrent back in 2019 when they opened up in Optimus Hall. And at that point, I didn't know how big Undercurrent was as far as like the multiple locations you guys have, and then Night Swim Coffee. At the time, I didn't know that existed either. I wasn't that invested in coffee yet to know like beans and roasters and stuff like that. I just knew like coffee shops that I liked.
Now, Night Swim did not exist in 2019.
Wow. Okay, cool. Awesome.
We didn't open our first Night Swim location until October of 21.
Oh, nice. So what beans were y'all using before you started using them?
Our primary or exclusive roaster was Onyx Coffee Lab.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. Cool. I've tried a few of theirs.
Arkansas.
Yeah, I've tried a few of theirs. So yeah, I wasn't even privy to that. And then I didn't actually like learn more about Night Swim until I went to one of Undercurrent's classes a couple months ago. I went to your cupping class, which is my second company I've ever went to.
Was that at the Undercurrent in Plaza Midwood or at the roastery? Okay.
Yeah, at the Plaza Midwood location.
Nice.
With Destiny. Exceptional employee there.
Yeah,
she
she's
knows
incredible.
So much. She made me feel sophisticated being a part of the class because like when she made the connection between like wine tasting and cupping, I was like, it really is the same thing. Yeah. Like you have very different regions that come from for like wines and different flavors that you're trying to like expose your palate to, and that's the same thing that's happening in a cupping. So I love that connection that she made there, and she was very knowledgeable about the different ways that it's roasted, the different ways that it's farmed, and different regions and things like that. So I enjoyed that a lot. And then that's where I tried multiple of the Night Swim coffees.
Cool.
And I was like, wow, Night Swim is pretty dope. And then learning that it's a combo of Undercurrent and not just coffee that teamed up to create this roastery, which also evolved into coffee shops, was awesome because learning the history of like the career growth for baristas, it seems like they kind of cap out at management. Like once they can become like a manager, that like that's it. If you just are a coffee shop, and then you guys giving this extra layer of advancement for them through Night Swim, I was like, that's like mind blowing. That's like really cool. So how did you ended up wanting to team up with Not Just Coffee? Like what's the relationship there? Like how did you guys come up with
that's
Night
a great
Swim?
question. But first I'll say Destiny was one of our first employees
Really?
at Undercurrent. I think we hired her probably 6 months before we even opened Undercurrent.
Wow.
5.5 years ago. And so she opened Undercurrent with us. She was,
Nice.
from day one, she's
an OG.
Yeah, she's an OG. And
Nice.
after a few years, she got a full-time job in her profession of choice. So she stayed with us part-time.
Right.
She'll come behind the bar as needed, and then she does, of course, our education program at Undercurrent.
Exceptional job with the education part.
But with Night Swim, that's a great question. How Undercurrent and Not Just Coffee came to create Night Swim and kind of move forward with that project. When I started in coffee, I didn't know anybody. So decided to do Undercurrent.
Right.
Had signed a lease, and a few months after I signed the lease, I was in Atlanta. This was in 2016.
Okay.
At the Specialty Coffee Association Annual Expo.
Yes.
And I was introduced to James Yoder.
Okay.
Co-founder with his wife Miracle of Not Just Coffee.
Right.
And I'd heard of James because I knew of Not Just Coffee. It was really the only specialty coffee business in Charlotte at the time. But I'd never met him. I'd seen him a few times. I'd been in Not Just Coffee and really admired the way they brewed coffee, had hospitality. I just thought it was probably the best coffee business in Charlotte at the time.
Right.
They had 2 pretty small locations in 7th Street Market and in Atherton Mill.
Okay.
Not the same Atherton Mill location they have now. It was in a different building. And
okay, cool.
This big barn, basically. It was like a farmer's market.
Okay, cool.
A large stand there, effectively. But we were introduced, and we were at a party. It was like kind of later at night in Atlanta. And then the next day, we were both outside, basically on a street corner outside the convention center, waiting for a taxi to go to lunch, each of us with a respective colleague. And then we just said hi and just decided to go have lunch together. So the 4 of us got into a taxi and went to lunch. And that was really the first time we sat down face to face and had a conversation. That night, we ended up going out together that night, and we pretty quickly became friends. By the time we went back to Charlotte a few days later, we had exchanged phone numbers and we're talking all the time. 1 year later, this was still a year before Undercurrent opened, James and I flew to Seattle together for the next SCA Expo. Shared a hotel room, spent the whole weekend together. By that time, we were already friends.
Right.
Even though Undercurrent hadn't opened yet, I was already kind of immersed in learning coffee, getting educated through different things, doing a lot of research and diligence, going through this fairly painful construction project with Undercurrent at the time. But by the time Undercurrent opened, we were, really combined with respect to both being friends, but also really discussing our business on a daily basis.
Okay.
Probably 10 months later, at that point, Undercurrent was successful very quickly. I learned the business, from scratch. I had no experience in coffee previous to doing Undercurrent, but I've learned a lot. Undercurrent was doing very well, and James and I realized that we had very similar aspirations. To stop right there, with Undercurrent, at that point, we were already opening our Office Hall location. So it opened 1 year after Plaza Midwood Undercurrent opened. We signed the lease before it even opened, so that was always part of the plan. And I knew that Undercurrent was designed and built to grow in Charlotte.
Right.
Charlotte had a very nascent coffee community. There was just really Not Just Coffee with its 2 locations at the time. It's really exploded since then.
Yeah, definitely.
At that time, it didn't exist like it does today. So knowing that I intended on growing Undercurrent like that had already started, and that James and Miracle had already opened, I think 3 of their locations by that point, but with the plans to open a couple more. We just realized we were doing the same thing in the same place with very similar philosophies. We both had tremendous respect for the way we both did it. And we realized, instead of learning and growing separately, we could work together, which would be more fun, really expand our breadth of knowledge and capabilities, because we're very different people, have different styles, have different backgrounds and strengths. And also, we also saw that we were competing for the same spaces, the same people. If we ever started roasting, we'd both have to invest concurrently into roasting facilities and learn that from scratch. Yeah. And rather than do that, why not just do it together? Yeah. Yeah, and that was sort of how that started. Well, that was the first conversation. That was in December of 2019. Or was it December of 2018? It was December of 2018. Gotcha. First time we had that conversation. And then we talked about it on and off. And I think in August of 2019, we had been talking more seriously about it and like brought it back up again and realized as we were growing, maybe it was time to really start considering that. And then right before COVID happened, we had formally decided to do it and started laying the groundwork for that, which is when we came up with the name Night Swim, which is another story. And then COVID happened. We'd already kind of laid some of the early groundwork for Night Swim, but that's when we started to really work on it and make it happen.
Gotcha. So it's really interesting that like it was really like mutual friendship that started everything. Before you went to that expo, what were you already in the mix of developing Undercurrent, or were you still kind of testing the waters and doing research within the coffee community?
Yeah, both. So when I went to the expo, when I met James, I had already signed the lease.
Oh, wow, okay.
So it was happening.
It was happening.
I made a commitment. I'd already left my job.
Gotcha.
And
where were you working before that?
I was at Wells Fargo at the time.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
And I started working for Wachovia before that. And I was with another firm before that.
Were you ever in the transition between like Wells Fargo and Wachovia and then like signing the lease? Were you ever working in the coffee industry, or you just loved coffee and you were like, I'm going to do this?
So you're asking how I got...
Why the shift from like the bank to coffee?
So I'd been in finance for 15 years.
Okay.
And had been in Charlotte here for 10 years.
Okay.
And I never really planned on leaving. I was starting to, I think, be less and less passionate about my job, which was very stressful and fairly intense. And even after kind of the length of time I'd been in the industry, it wasn't lessening. But at the same time, there's a lot of reasons why I wanted to stay doing what I was doing. My wife, Erin, got sick in late 2015 with stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma, of which she recovered very well. However, for the first 20 days that we knew she was sick, we thought she had stage 4 lung cancer.
Oh, wow.
Stage 4 lung cancer, which I learned then, I wouldn't have known otherwise, is pretty much universally fatal. Very few people survive stage 4 lung cancer. So, we had a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old at the time. I left my job at the bank and I didn't go back for 5 weeks. I'd never been away from work in 15 years for more than 5 straight days. So, I was really...
It took you back.
It took me, it just kind of brought me back to reality outside of my job. And, for 20 days, we thought Erin was going to die. I thought my kids were
very intense 20 days.
Yeah, we went to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. We went to UNC Chapel Hill. But on like that 20th day or so, we got the final results from the biopsy, which turned out to be Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Thank God.
Which is something that most people can survive. Not everyone does, but most people do, which was a game changer. But it was at that point that I realized, I don't think I want to go back to my job. I never stepped away from it. I'd never even really had a chance to breathe. And now that I did and saw, I was reminded what was out there and what was important to me.
Yeah.
I realized I want to do something else. In my job in finance, I never worked in my community, never worked. I was in Florida before, I was in North Carolina in finance as well. But my roles never included the city I lived or even the states that I lived for the most part. So I was really disconnected from the people and places around me. And I really wanted to do something that was a part of my community. And I didn't know what that would be exactly.
Yeah.
And going to ask about, why coffee, especially if I had no experience. I've been drinking coffee, as I told you, since 1983. And even 20 years ago, my wife and I met 23 years ago. 20 years ago, Erin used to say, Todd, you should open a coffee shop, because it was so obvious how much I loved coffee.
Right.
And wherever we would go, I would wake up in the morning. I could be at her parents' house in Gainesville, Florida, or in South Florida, where my family lived. We lived in Central Florida at the time. Or if we traveled, literally, if I had time, the first thing I would do is I'd wake up and I'd just go to the coffee shop. I love to read. I'll sit and read a book with coffee. I love talking to people.
Yep.
I just love being
in a coffee shop.
Caffeine-fueled environment.
Yes.
But more than just the caffeine, the environment that a coffee shop provides is very different from virtually any other place.
Agreed.
Place, which we all know. I don't have to really describe it, but a place where you can just come and sit down and be surrounded by strangers and or people you know.
Yep.
And a very casual, relaxed atmosphere fueled by caffeine.
Yep.
And engaged in different activities where so often just conversations. I've had hundreds and hundreds of conversations with strangers.
Yes.
That happen just very.
Yes.
And I love that.
I love it too.
I love what a coffee shop can provide in that respect. So I've always loved it. And when I realized that there was an opportunity to do something in my community that at the time, especially in Plaza Midwood, where we have lived for 10 years at the time, there were no coffee shops. I realized I took my career in finance and realized I had a lot of resources that I developed over time and experience that gave me at least a different kind of ability to structure and consider a business and grow a business, although very different from operations and very different from retail and very different from coffee. But I just used sort of what I thought of as a passion for creating the best coffee and coffee shop I could think of, and a confidence that I wasn't really sure if it was founded or not, along with what I knew to be an experience that I could utilize to help at least support the process. You know, my career in finance and hard work and communication and dealing with people and contract negotiation and analysis and all the different things that any business really needs to have to succeed. And very quickly, I just decided to do it. I didn't think real hard about it, happened very quickly.
He said, I'm going to do it.
Probably, you know, my wife was fully behind it, and probably a few weeks later or a month later, I signed a lease. So and at that point, I was on a 3-month sabbatical from work. I'd gone back to work after those 5 weeks. And then I realized, you know, Aaron was starting chemotherapy, and like, I don't want to do this because my role was very intense. I had clients and that were very demanding, that required a lot of support. For the kind of work we did, and I just didn't have that kind of focus at that time.
Gotcha.
So I took a 3-month sabbatical and very, very quickly realized I didn't want
that
to do
was
that.
it.
So that's when the Undercurrent
came about.
Started, and that's when I signed a lease during that sabbatical. And then I quit my job and just moved forward.
It's really fascinating. A lot of the coffee shops that I love, whether it be in Charlotte or just North Carolina in general, a lot of the coffee shop owners, if I had time to talk to someone, or I have talked to them so far on my podcast, they all have a good majority of them surprised me with not having coffee shop experiences. Like, I think most people are just like, I love coffee. And a lot of people have told me, if you want to be in coffee, you want to be with people. You want to create an environment for people, which is true. That's kind of my thing. I love people. I love coffee. I also love learning about coffee, which I love that you guys have those classes that teach you different aspects of coffee, whether it be like latte arts or your cupping or like just anything you could think of. If y'all could put a curriculum together for people to just have that exposure. And most of your classes are free too. So that's also, you know, a really good way to reach people at any level that they are in coffee to be able to do. So yeah, I appreciate what Undercurrent does, because you do create that experience where you can just have those organic conversations with people over something you love, which is coffee. One thing brought y'all together, but it allowed you guys to form relationships that you probably wouldn't have any other way. And basically that's the concept of open view. Like, I want people to be exposed on different aspects of coffee through my through my podcast, through my Instagram page, anything, to exchange their perspective and expand their views on coffee specifically. But over coffee, you learn so much about people, their walk of life, their story. And I feel like I've learned so much just sitting in a coffee shop, as you said, and just talking about random people. Like, what'd you get this today? And like, you know, I don't really like dark roast coffee. Like, how'd you get into dark roast coffee? And by then you've made a friend for a lifetime just over getting a cup of coffee. So that's pretty cool. Night Swim, how did y'all get that name? And is that like interlinked with Undercurrent? Because they're both like water experts.
Yeah, you know, that's a little bit of a coincidence, that part of it. Although, I mean, I guess there's some ties. You know, I grew up in Florida.
Okay.
The name Undercurrent, as I mentioned already, was really more of a reflection of, you know, underground and what was below the surface, and that's sort of how, you know, which is a reference to water as well, but it's even more kind of philosophical and societal that we were referring to.
Right.
But I also grew up on the coast of Florida. You know, I surfed, loved the ocean, loved the natural springs, loved water. My stepfather's from Trinidad, so I spent a lot of time there. And so the ocean and water has always had been up until I moved to Charlotte.
I was going to say, how do you feel like being on land all the time?
For 30 years, I lived by the water.
Right.
And the last 17, I have not, but it was always a really big part of my life. So, you know, Undercurrent had sort of that holistic meaning to me and my background. For Night Swim, it was a little bit different. James and I, and my wife and his wife Miracle, and my wife Erin, when we decided to join and create this concept, at first, we didn't know how we were going to treat the name. We even, you know, we were open to different ideas to include, should all the new cafes and roasting business be called Undercurrent, or should it be called Not Just Coffee?
Exactly.
We already have these established,
names
successful
and
brands with loyal followings and, you know, brand equity and awareness. So does it make sense
to use one and not the other?
Right.
Yeah.
So how do we do that? How's that? And, you know, we were sitting and talking one day, and James very astutely and correctly said, you know, if we use one of these two names, the other family is going to forever feel slighted or left out.
Yeah.
And he's right. And we would have. You know, and it's
either way.
It's human nature. It's human nature, even if you pick the one that you think might be the best for different reasons.
Right.
you're always going to feel a little bit slighted.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, pretty immediately we said, you know what, we need to create something together that's our own and that's new and will be an extension of what Undercurrent and Not Just Coffee are.
Right.
And that's what started the search for the name that ultimately became Night Swim. The other thing we thought about doing was retroactively rebranding Undercurrent and Not Just Coffee.
Wow.
In fact, for a few months after that was the plan.
Wow.
So, but then it was maybe 6 months later, we're like, no, let's not do that. Let's
scratch the surface.
We're going to manage these 3 brands. They can be related closely.
Right.
But, there's value in these organically grown local brands that people have a strong devotion to. We can always retain the ability, if we want to retroactively rebrand, or to rebrand, not to retroactively. But in the meantime, we've been very happy with keeping those 3 brands separate and together and alive. But so for Night Swim, we've spent a few months brainstorming names, it's like thinking of a name for a baby. It's not easy. Nothing sounds good.
Nope.
With coffee in particular, or coffee shops, then names are taken.
Yeah.
Surnames we can't use. So it wasn't easy. In our different families, we had these lists of names going. And we'd talk about it like once or twice a week for a few months. Nothing really stuck. There was a few that we liked that were already used. And it was in February of 2020. It was right as COVID was sort of on the radar, but it was something we had heard about, but it wasn't really affecting us yet. And that spring, if you recall, was beautiful and cool and sunny and bright. It was like a really nice spring.
Yeah.
One of the nicest I've ever experienced.
We were inside. We were like on lockdown, but it was nice outside.
Yeah. But it was still nice the month before that.
Yeah.
And my wife and I were in Durham just for the weekend, and we walked into this boutique hotel out of curiosity. We were staying there, just kind of walking around the downtown area. And we walked in, and on the way out, Aaron walked out the front door, and I took a left down a hallway just to see what was in there. It was like a service elevator. So it wasn't really for the public, I realized.
Right.
But right next to the elevator was a poster that was behind, it was like a framed poster, and it said Night Swim, and then there was a wave that looked a lot like Undercurrent's wave, and it was like a vintage poster advertising some event or something.
Right.
So I took a picture of it, and I immediately texted it to James and said, Night Swim Coffee, ! And I took it outside to Erin, and I showed her, and we talked about it, like, oh, that's a pretty cool name. So James never responded to me, and about 2 weeks later, I was at Not Just Coffee in J Street, and I was in a meeting with him and Miracle, and maybe one of our managers, and we were brainstorming on other things for Night Swim. And then Miracle got up, and we started about names again, and then Miracle got up, walked away, and I said, James, what about Night Swim? Because he never responded to that, and it wasn't on our list.
Right.
He goes, what do you mean? I go, Night Swim, the text I sent you a couple weeks ago.
Right.
And he didn't remember. He looked on his phone, he pulled it up. He's like, oh. He's like, we started thinking about it and talking about the name Night Swim. And Miracle walked back up at the time, what night swimming meant to us in our youth, because we're all in our 40s. And, we had done through different parts of our lives, different types of night swimming at different times. And we all had these really sentimental, fond, interesting experiences that we really appreciated in our lives.
Right.
And then thinking of how, like, even the act of night swimming, of course, is very individual and how we all perceive it and what our experiences have been. But for me, and I think for each of us, there's an element of presence when you're doing that. And I think that's part of what I like about a coffee shop. You can walk off this, your busy life. We can bring it in with us and work and do things. Yeah. But oftentimes for me, I'm walking in and I'm leaving the outside world behind me. And it's one of the few places when I do that that I can actually be more present, where I am, and try to get out of my head, whether I'm having a conversation or just enjoying the relaxing feel, or people watching, or reading a good book. I'm just much more present in it. And it's and it brings people together in other ways. And when I have gone night swimming, it's usually with other people. It's really a connecting experience. And also there's a great sense of presence because of the type of experience that is. Yeah. So we all felt that way about it, and we also just really liked the name. And sometimes the name doesn't have to have a meaning. Right. And Starbucks came from the Moby Dick character. It has nothing to do with coffee.
Yeah, exactly.
And
it has nothing to do with coffee.
And it didn't have to be that. But and most people may not even realize where it came from. It doesn't even really matter. So it's what you really do with that brand and that name. Right. That's very important. But we thought, Night Swim works. We can do a lot with the brand. It suits us. We like where it came from and its meaning. And that's how it happened. And we just went with it. So there maybe is a connection between Undercurrent and Night Swim with respect to sort of the water element, theme. But it wasn't necessarily
intentionally. I mean, It is the way that you describe night swims. That is true, the presence of it, because you have to be completely detached. There's no way your phone is out there with you when you're night swimming. There's no like other distractions happening. It's like you and the people around you and just enjoying the moment. And you're right, that presence that you do have when you go into coffee shops, you are very present. Like whenever I have a son that's 2, but that was like going to coffee shops when he was in his early ages during like nap times. That was my like time. I was like, all right, I'm going to the coffee shop, and like that's where I journaled or I read my book or like just chill. Like you said, people watch, talk to people, but that was like my time, and it was like my time to be present outside of the house. Like you said, leaving all the other stuff behind. So I think that is a really creative way of how you got to night swim, and you guys are capturing that essence very well in all of your coffee shops. There's that easement of like I belong here and I can find whatever I'm looking for here, whether that's like just quiet, a quiet corner for me to read my book or a conversation to strike up. Like the environments you guys have as far as with like foot traffic, like even the one that we're in now, like you can get all the feels you need. If you wanted to be outside today and still be covered, you can have that there. If you wanted some good sunlight, we can get you that. If you wanted just a quiet corner to chill, you got that too. And if you want good food and you want some coffee, you can get that in all your locations. So you guys are doing a good job captivating those things for other people.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, y'all like sound really well in that. Even like my friend, when I took her to different, like I took her to one undercurrent and I took her one night, so she's like, I could feel the vibes are similar, but they're slightly different. But she's like, but I could tell one day if I wanted to have like a specific vibe, I can go to undercurrent. If I want another vibe, I can go to night swim. But the consistency in your coffee is like top notch. I think that's probably her favorite roaster so far. And she's not even used to like looking for beans. Right, that's a new thing that like us going to our coffee shop visit, she's getting used to, is like, wow, I didn't know that there were so many different like flavors that could come from coffee beans, or like different ways. Like she'll ask now, what coffee beans are you using? Is that like a light roast or a dark roast? And it's really cool like seeing her like exposure to coffee grow, and then mine too, just learning like the different processes that come with it and like how you guys source your coffees and stuff like that. With your classes, is there going to be, I know there's, most of your classes seem to be in Plaza Midwood. What's the difference between your classes in Plaza Midwood and the ones at your roastery?
Really, Destiny has done a few of the classes at the roastery just when she had a type of class that needed more space.
Gotcha.
That's really all it is.
Gotcha.
The lab at Undercurrent in Plaza Midwood is small. It's a great space.
Yeah.
It's intimate. It has all the tools. But with bigger classes, it's a little bit easier to go to.
Do it at that one.
Yeah, we might do more things at Night Swim, Night Swim Roastery.
Cool.
Because we have, we're actually taking our training right now. We train all of our staff at Not Just Coffee, Night Swim, and Undercurrent's lab.
Oh, cool.
And we're going to move that over to the roastery. We have a cupping room there, and we just bought an espresso machine for it. We actually need to get the pitch rinser put in. Okay. Once we do, which will hopefully happen this week, we're going to move our employee training over to the roastery. It's just a bigger space.
Yep.
Plus, it's a little more neutral, bringing all of our new hires to the roastery, which is Night Swim, to kind of just integrate them into the culture a little bit better. So that's really all that is. So
what's the future look like for Undercurrent?
So we are not going to have any more Undercurrent or Not Just Coffee cafes.
Oh,
yeah. Okay. So everything that we do going forward is Night Swim. So so even though they are 3 different brands, we do manage them as one business,
right?
And we, look at our growth and development of our people and our cafes and our coffee with really that one lens. We do manage Undercurrent and Not Just Coffee uniquely in certain ways because they have their own identity, and there's things that are very special about them, and we want to cultivate that and curate that. We don't want to lose those things. So in terms of the growth of Undercurrent, it's really just continuing to try to improve and evolve with the 2 cafes that we have. And then, of course, the relationship to Night Swim is also something that it'll continue to benefit from.
Awesome. Yeah. I appreciate your time today, Todd. I love what Undercurrent, Night Swim, and Not Just Coffee is doing here in Charlotte. You guys are really meeting the needs of your community. For coming from a coffee enthusiast myself and wanting just to learn more about coffee and not having the opportunity to work in one, you guys are definitely meeting the need there and just creating an environment for us to just get to know other coffee enthusiasts or people in general and have great quality coffee in the meantime as well. So I appreciate your time giving us the backstory of how Undercurrent has grown and where they're going, where Night Swim is going, where not just coffee is going to also merge forces and grow as well. Thank you guys for tuning in to Open View and exchanging our perspectives to expand our view on coffee. See you next time.
Bye. Thank you, Jada. It's been great to be with you.
Thanks.